to die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. So many of us tend to think of death as the end of all we know and are, when it is merely a change of condition, a change from one existence to another. Sadly, we in the West usually regard death as the opposite of life. Well, it isn't. It's the opposite of birth. And surely as we must be born to enter physical life, we must all at some time die. But then what? For whatever we may believe, we must all at some time wonder what is going to happen to us afterwards. What is death? Why is it such a dark, unhappy concept? Could it be because it always appears so final, such a full stop to all we know of as life? This idea of the unknown, of our ceasing to exist, is frightening.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds, might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
And yet we are continuously fascinated by the subject of death and all we associate with it, from fables to folklore, from ghost stories to resurrections. Most of the ancient cultures believed in some form of survival after death. Even today, most philosophies, views, and beliefs seem to have some features in common, like the concept of heaven, though they vary as to whether there is punishment or hell. What is known as the ageless wisdom of the East, on which modern theosophy is based, showed death's place in life and how to approach it, as well as giving us some idea of what happens afterwards. And whatever their differences, this wisdom is the most constantly recurring theme in all religions. But though much has been spoken and written about death, the actual facts of what happens after the event are not generally known. Most of us have only vague ideas about what, if anything, survives death, and about what really does happen to us when we die. Strong echoes of the ageless wisdom are found in the ancient Egyptians' belief that they would receive immortality after death, bestowed on them by their god Osiris. But the quality of that afterlife would be determined by their behavior while alive, very like the concept of karma, as we'll see. They also believed that their initial survival of death occurred in a double of themselves, echoes here of what we now know as the astral body. This was their car, as they called it, endowed with all the person's good and bad qualities. In this vehicle, they believed they could eat, drink, and enjoy the odor of incense. They were obsessed with death, as the sheer size of their awe-inspiring funerary monuments shows. The idea of some form of survival and a judgment soon after death, where gods or assessors at the entrance to the next world evaluate a person's life and determine their place in the hereafter, is also found in virtually all cultures and religions, past and present. The Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian attitude to death differed widely from that of the Egyptians. It was grim and stark, with sickness and extinction as the wages of sin on earth. Although in early Judaism, death was supposed to close the book, Saul's request to the witch of Endor to bring up the dead prophet Samuel for him implied that as far as he was concerned, the dead, or at least some of them, still existed somewhere, probably in Sheol, the land of gloom and darkness. But later the belief in an afterlife became the accepted teaching of classical Judaism, a tradition that was to percolate through into Christianity. But what real knowledge has survived? Even the Hindu religion, with its sophisticated constitution of the inner man and its equally sophisticated account of the various inner world lokas, or spirit spaces, doesn't give a detailed account of what happens when we die. However, the occult of the after-death states was reintroduced to the world by the 19th century occultist Helena Blavatsky, one of the founders of the modern Theosophical Society. She received this previously secret information direct from two of the masters of the wisdom, the guardians of this knowledge. These are not spirit communications, but are more highly evolved than not only the average person, but even those we call geniuses. Faculties of inner perception, latent in all of us, in them are highly developed. This enables them to examine subjective experiences in full consciousness. It is with these faculties that they can not only follow what happens to a man's soul and spiritual principles after his death, but also to become aware of his feelings and thoughts, which are the substance of a dead person's post-mortem experiences. These powers far transcend any clairvoyant or spiritualistic medium. One of the most fundamental ideas in the Master's teaching concerning the afterlife is that nothing in the whole cosmos endures unchanged forever. They show how in nature everything comes and goes. The death of physical form is just one event in an everlasting, continuous process of life. In other words, this means a resurrection, resuscitation, rebirth, somehow a return to life. But as what? We've all felt the awful finality of death in our own bereavements. We know that our loved one has somehow left that body forever. We feel that what has departed is the true person, not what is left behind, a corpse, an empty shell. But what has happened to them? Where have they gone? From the oldest cultures to the latest observations from intensive care units, human death is seen as an instant, irreversible process, signified by the loss of capacity to breathe and the loss of brainstem function. As the seat of consciousness during physical life is in the brain, if this is not functioning, there can be no meaningful activity of the cerebral hemispheres. In other words, no physical consciousness, thoughts, feelings, or social interaction with the environment. The capacity for consciousness is perhaps the nearest one can get to providing a biological context to the concept of soul. The occult philosophy is that consciousness must have a vehicle through which to operate, either physical or non-physical. When we die, the physical vehicle ceases to function. But we have non-physical vehicles of consciousness in which we survive this death. As far as a physical body is concerned, when death occurs, breathing ceases and putrefaction begins. The body decays. The Egyptians were concerned that their dead should be able not only to breathe, but to live again. The pyramid texts describe a ceremony called the opening of the mouth. The mouth of the corpse was fixed open, thus enabling breath to pass. For the Hindus, prana, or breath, is again a vital principle. And in the Master's teaching, prana is also essential to our inner vehicles. Before we deal with the question of where we go and what we are when we die, we first have to find out what exactly we are when alive. The most complete answers are to be found in the information that the Masters gave to Madame Blavatsky and her associates. They explained that the basic framework of man, as described by St. Paul, namely body, soul, and spirit, is subdivided into 7 constituents or principles. These 7 principles, the constituents of man, have their own associated colors, sounds, states of consciousness, and so on. And these 7 also correspond to the constituent planes of the Earth and to planetary characteristics. This is all relevant to the after-death states. We know that everything surrounding us is composed of physical matter, solid, liquid, and gas. But we are only aware of these through our senses, and the organs of these senses can receive only those messages from the outside world to which they can respond, the physical level. But just because you can only listen to AM on your radio doesn't mean FM, wave, medium wave, and so on aren't being transmitted. The physical level has other principles on different wavelengths, which are vital to its function. These are the astral double and prana, which form a lower triad with the physical. But we can't say that we are merely physical. We feel, we have emotions, like anger and love. We also have mental activities, such as memory, imagination, and thinking. All these are inner activities. And while our minds are separate from our emotions, they are closely related, though distinct, areas of consciousness. The brain, the seat of consciousness in life, is obviously physical, and through it we manifest our thoughts, emotions, and desires, non-physical in themselves, but all registered in the physical brain through which we become conscious of them. A man may often appear dead, yet from the last beat of the heart and the moment when the last spark of animal heat leaves the body, the brain thinks, and the ego, in those few brief seconds, lives his whole life over again. Speak in whispers when in the presence of death. Especially keep quiet just after death, or you will disturb the soft ripple of thought and hinder the busy work of the past, casting its reflection upon the veil of the future. For at the solemn moment of death, every person, even when death is sudden, sees the whole of their past life unfold before them in its minutest details. For one short instant, the personality becomes one with the all-knowing ego or individuality. But this instant is enough to show them the whole chain of causes which have been at work during their life. They see and know themselves as they are, unadorned by flattery or self-deception. They read their life as a spectator looking down into the arena they are just leaving. They feel and know the justice of all the suffering they have ever endured. For some of us, the only evidence of survival after death is the seance room, where spirits from the other side appear to communicate. For example, Uncle George tells us, through a medium, impressive things about us that no one else could possibly have known, and then proceeds to give us a message.
Now, these messages may be of comfort to mourning relatives, but what, in fact, is Uncle George? And where, in fact, is Uncle George? And why hasn't he gone on to the expected heaven, or indeed hell, that awaits him?
To answer this, we must look at the next major stage in the post-mortem journey, which is known as the death struggle. Most people are largely self-centered, a mixture of urges, ambitions, loves, hates, indulgences, weaknesses, and strengths. But all of us have some higher qualities of unselfishness or altruism. And when we express them during our lives, they are recorded as part of the experiences of that life. After death, the higher qualities struggle to separate from the lower, self-centered part of our nature. This process is called the death struggle. And during it, the life's experiences are distilled into higher and lower parts. If man is seen as a milk bottle afloat between incarnations, it's like separating the spiritual cream from the milk of ordinary personal experience. The ego attracts the spiritual cream to itself. It can assimilate only that. None of the milk, the base and non-spiritual aspects, can possibly enter it or become part of it. When the bottle is eventually no longer needed, when evaporation and distillation have occurred, it will disintegrate, and the purified essence will become part of the wholeness and oneness of the ocean, the world around it.
So the discarded lower part, or shell, and the higher spiritual ego have finally separated, at the end of a period known as gestation. Another review of the life just over takes place, and the second death occurs.
After this second death, the separation of higher ego from lower shell, the lower discarded part, which contains the person's memories, remains in a subjective state known as Kamaloka. Kamaloka means literally the place of desire. It is the realm of emotion, passion, carnality, and is divided into many regions and sub-regions corresponding to the passions and mental states of the dead. This is the summer land of the spiritualists and the judgment chamber of the ancient Egyptians. Uncle George is one of these shells, and these are the entities that come through at seances as communicating spirits. They still have their earthly desires and emotions, and it is these which hold them close to the earth. But they normally remain at this level for a comparatively short time and eventually crumble away.
So while the shell in Kamaloka will disintegrate, the pearl lives on, and eventually, through rebirth, is integrated into a new life as a part of a necklace of incarnations we each live. And the process begins all over again. At first, it must enter the heavenly world of Devachan.
Devachan means the place of the gods, and is the blissful state that the ego enjoys after it emerges from the death struggle and gestation. It is the equivalent of the ancient Egyptians' realm of Osiris, the Hindu Svarga, the Muslims' paradise, and the Christians' heaven. The common concept of heaven is as the dwelling place of God, gods, and spirits, and the home or state of being of the saved, the chosen, or the blessed. The term heaven also describes the celestial spheres, in contrast to the earth, the dwelling place of man, and the underworld, the place of the damned. Devachan is a subjective state, wholly conditioned by the spiritual content of the immediate past life on earth. The masters say that we create our own Devachan, mostly during the last days or even moments of our intellectual, sentient lives. In the same way that a baby, through infancy, gradually awakens to the novel surroundings of earth life, so consciousness, and with it a momentary remembrance of our past life, returns slowly as the ego enters the heaven state of Devachan. The karma of its past life
good and bad deeds, words and thoughts, become effective only on rebirth into a new physical body in the physical world where all these causes started. In this way, we always have to pay for our sins, voluntary and involuntary, on return to earth life. Meanwhile, we are rewarded in Devachan, for this is a state of intense selfness, during which an ego reaps the reward of its unselfishness on earth. No pain, no shadow of sorrow comes to darken the bright horizon of this happiness. Each of us creates our own Devachan around us like a dream. And for each of us, that perfect dream is reality, where we make for ourselves all we wish to see. We cannot look down and see or contact our loved ones on earth. We are not aware of anything they may be suffering as a result of our death. We create them and have them with us just as we hold them in our mind's eye. In the Devachan states, there are as many varieties of bliss as on earth there are shades of color and sound and levels of capability to perceive and appreciate them. As in physical earth life, there is for the ego in Devachan a life cycle, beginning with a birth and slow emergence into Devachan and ending in a slow decline. But not a death, but a birth into another physical body, a baby on earth. The quality of lives in Devachan and on earth is determined wholly by the law of cause and effect, karma. As the physical body disintegrates, and the astral double too, the constituents of our mortal souls disperse. None of these, however, disappears without trace. Each leaves behind it in the inner worlds a residue conditioned by how we lived our life. These are the physical, psychic, and mental tendencies and predispositions called skandhas in the East, the accumulated experience of our past life, which is carried forward to the next incarnation. The new personality will be conditioned by these results of the ego's previous lives. It is through these skandhas that we come into our new life with all the elements of our personal makeup, our characters, in short, already formed. And all this is according to the perfectly just law of karma. We really do become what we have made ourselves.
The new being is now rewarded and punished on earth for the good and bad deeds of the old life. Karma is an entry book in which all our acts are carefully recorded to our debit and credit by ourselves, or rather by our thoughts and actions. It is as if at the end of each life a line is drawn and the balance of credit and debit carried over into the next.
The old me is the true parent of the new me, far more so, in fact, than any mother or father in the flesh.
Life, death, death, life. The words have led for ages our thought and consciousness, and firmly seemed two opposites. But now long-hidden pages are opened, liberating truths undreamed. Life only is, or death is life disguised. Life, a short death, until by life we are surprised.
So the cycle is completed from death to rebirth, the sudden onset of unconsciousness at death, through Kamaloka, waking in Devachan with its blissful and vividly real dreams. Then the ego subsides back into unconsciousness. And just prior to our rebirth, we have a vision of the new life to come. We eventually wake again as an infant into whatever that new life has in store for us. We start with the ready-made character and some know-how gleaned in past lives, but also with some handicaps, karmic limitations. So death, like life, is a natural part of an ongoing continuous process. a long series of associated but separate Earth lives, each responsible for the condition of the next. We have seen a full and detailed account of what happens when we die, and we know now that the reason for living, and therefore dying many times, is to work out karma, to gain experience for our long-term evolution and development, until we finally reach the stage of perfection and are freed from the need to reincarnate anymore. Just as at the end of each day, we're not quite the same as we were when we woke, so at the end of each life, through experience, we have changed. And in this, we are each an example of the evolutionary nature of nature herself. She too is on the road to perfection, stage by stage, life by life, learning through experience, growing to fulfillment.
There are two beings in my single self. A godhead watches nature from behind, at play in front with a brilliant surface elf, a time-born creature with a human mind, tranquil and boundless like a sea or sky. The godhead knows himself, eternity's sun, radiant his mind and vast, his heart as free. His will is a scepter of dominion. The smaller self, by nature's passions driven, thoughtful and erring, learns his human task. All must be known, and to that greatness given, his mind and life, the mirror and the mask. As with the figure of a cymbal dance, the screened omniscient plays at ignorance.
To the higher ego, existence, life, is a cyclic process of birth and death, dying as one person, returning to earth life as another. We are breathed in and then out again. It is as natural as that.
Behind all created things, there is an everlasting something, an absolute something that always is. This something is the very origin of existence. From it stems all life in every thing or being in the cosmos. It is the root source of all creation, of all thinking and feeling, all ideas and ideals. One aspect of it is universal memory. It is the master plan of design and form in nature, containing in itself the archetypes of all that is, was, or ever will be.
The electron on which forms and worlds are built leaped into being, a particle of God, a spark from the eternal energy split. It is the infinite's blind, minute abode. In that small, flaming chariot Shiva rides, the one devised innumerably to be. His oneness in invisible forms he hides, time's tiny temples to eternity. Atom and molecule in their unseen plan buttress an edifice of strange onenesses. Crystal and plant, insect and beast and man. Man on whom the world unity shall seize, widening his soul spark to an epiphany of the timeless vastness of infinity.
The whole cosmos is a living completeness, and everything in it is and has life. There is no dead matter. Everything, even what is called inorganic substance, has to some degree the dual aspects of form, which is matter, and energy, which is life. The energy in the atoms of matter is conscious, sentient, at its own level. It is spirit. In this sense, everything is spiritual in its essential nature. It is from the inward spiritual realms that physical things with their natures and characteristics are projected into objectivity. This is the true process of what is called creation, but everything existed in the divine mind before it was brought into being.
And what if all of animated nature be but organic harps diversely framed, that tremble into thought, as o'er them sweeps plastic and vast one intellectual breeze, at once the soul of each and God of all?
For most of us, the most conclusive evidence for survival after death is the experience of those who have been regarded as clinically dead, but who have then recovered and have talked about what happened to them. Hundreds of such cases have been recorded and investigated during recent years.
The consultant, having looked at the x-rays, they could see that the vertebrae in the neck were in fact broken. I was waiting to go into the operating theatre. I suddenly realised that I was in fact not still lying on the bed, but I'd moved to being above the bed. I was on the ceiling, but looking down upon myself. I suddenly started to progress down a tunnel. Passed down through the dark part, it then became suddenly golden towards the end, and I suddenly emerged into this absolutely beautiful garden. On my right-hand side was my friend Olwen, and she stood there, and she had died about 10 weeks previously. I wasn't at all surprised to see her. She said, it's a super place here, and I said, yeah, I can see that, you know. But then I left her. Why I left her, I don't know. And as I proceeded along the path, again on the right-hand side, stood my father. Now, he'd died 2 years previously. He looked as he used to look before he'd be very ill, big and chubby and round and friendly. And it was wonderful to see him as I remembered him a few years previously. And he equally was very pleased to see me, I pleased to see him, but it didn't seem odd. It was just a meeting, and he said, you know, oh, it's lovely to have you here, Claire. And I said, you know, it's great to be here, Dad. But at this point I thought, oh dear, should I be here? I think that was the thing. I felt that perhaps I couldn't stay with my father at that point. And in fact, I said quite apologetically to him, but Dad, I can't stay, I'm sorry. I can't stay with you now. I've got to get back. I've got to get back. The boys need me. I immediately left everything, and I was immediately back in the bed, looking back up at the ceiling, as I'd been before whatever happened, happened.
It is only in near-death experiences that we seem to reunite with our loved ones who have died before us. In actual death, this does not happen, as we are unconscious.
The masters tell us a great deal about what happens to what are called premature deaths, those that commit suicide or are killed in accidents. These are the exceptions to the after-death rule, and they have to remain in Kamaloka until the very last moment of what would, karmically, have been the natural duration of their lives. The term accidents means sudden death from all natural causes, earthquakes, cyclones, floods, as well as wars, riots, vehicle crashes, murder, and so on. And it is these cases of premature death that are so important in spirit communications through mediums.
Suicides can, and often do, communicate through mediums. The good and pure of them sleep quietly, blissfully, dreaming happy visions of earth life, with no consciousness of being beyond that life. Those who are neither good nor bad will sleep dreamlessly, while the evil ones will, in proportion to their wickedness, suffer the horrors of a nightmare lasting years. Their thoughts become living things, their involutionary passions real substance, and they receive back all the misery they have heaped on others. Reality and fact yield a far more terrible inferno than even Dante had imagined. The fate of an accident victim is much kinder. The victim, whether good or bad, was not responsible for his death, even if that death was karmic, retribution for some action in a previous life, and not the direct result of an act deliberately committed by the person during the life in which he happened to be killed. Motive is everything, and we are punished in a case of direct responsibility, never otherwise. For the majority of us, dying is simply a gentle slipping into unconsciousness and entering the heaven worlds. The experience should not be fearful or unpleasant. Nature is very kind to us in this. In the accident victim's case, the natural hour of death was premature and involuntary, while in that of the suicide, death was voluntary and with full and deliberate knowledge of its immediate consequences. But in all these instances, the common factor is that the physical lifespan has not run its natural course. The allotted span would have been that determined by the person's karma.
So to recap on suicides and accident victims, both regain some consciousness in Kamaloka, and both can, for a time, communicate with those on Earth through mediums. But usually they are unaware of what is actually happening on Earth, except insofar as they can occasionally use a medium's perceptive faculties. In the case of accidents, the normal Kamalokic experience is not unpleasant, varying between near unconsciousness and vivid but dreamlike memories of Earth. In due course, at the time when death would naturally have occurred, the death struggle and gestation state proceed. In the case of suicides, the after-death state is again determined by the kind of person they were, as is their experience of Kamaloka, until such time as death would normally have occurred. They too are usually unaware of what is happening on Earth.
A shortened life means that the anticipated cycle of experience, learning, and assimilation has not been completed. This affects what happens in Kamaloka and in Devachan, both periods being shortened to the point where in the case of infant or child deaths, they are virtually non-existent, and rebirth is almost immediate. In the case of very young children, if the spiritual principles did not separate from the personal psyche, only the physical body would have been affected. And the result of this is the only case of real reincarnation of a personality. In many of these cases, the new child brings with it a memory of the previous, involuntarily shortened life.
In all other cases of reincarnation, the ego, the continuing spiritual soul, puts down a ray of itself to quicken the dormant personal skandhas of a new personality. That is, a new astral double, new life principles, and a new physical body, all distinct, except for the skandhas, from the previous one. It is, in effect, a new being, with a new sense of I, and it does not normally remember its last life. Undoubtedly, contact with the dead through a medium has given comfort to many bereaved people, but it is not a practice to be encouraged because of the effect on the dead person's skandhas, which is nearly always detrimental. Pure loving sensitives, however, laboring under an illusion, think their loved ones come down to them on Earth, while it is actually their own spirits that are raised towards those in the Devachan. What is called rapport is in plain fact a sympathetic vibration between the astral part of the physical medium and the astral part, not the higher soul, of the dead person's personality. The medium as receiver tunes in to the higher wavelength of the transmitter, the spirit. So no Uncle George has ever really returned from the spheres to hold sweet intercourse with mortals. But this shell of a person retains much of the personal memory, habits of thought, and idiosyncrasies that were typical of the late personality. And though it can't itself originate action, its influence is sometimes felt by sensitives reaching higher spheres, and occasionally it can be specifically helpful by way of warning or advice.
There are some remarkable stories where such shells, under the right circumstances, have been able to protect loved ones still on Earth, and where they have given positive aid and valuable information. The shell of a highly intelligent, well-educated but unspiritual person who dies a natural death will last longer. And helped by the shadow of their own memory, they may deliver deep-sounding or high-flown lectures through trance speakers. But they are only repeating, parrot fashion, things they knew of and thought during their lifetime. This is not living wisdom beyond the grave, as might appear to the enthusiastic channeler. So now we know that we are the result of all our yesterdays, and what we are and what we do now creates our tomorrows. This process is inevitable and inexorable. It is the law.
I have become what before time I was. A secret touch has quieted thought and sense. All things by the agent mind created pass into a void and mute magnificence. My life is a silence grasped by timeless hands. The world is drowned in an immortal gaze. Naked my spirit from its vestures stands. I am alone with my own self for space. My heart is a center of infinity, my body a dot in the soul's vast expanse. All being's huge abyss awakes under me, once screened in a gigantic ignorance. A momentless immensity, pure and bare, I stretch to an eternal everywhere.
But what is the ultimate purpose of our evolution and immortality, of our many lives and deaths? The ultimate I is the great mystery of existence, the final unknowable. It is said that when we can consciously be that, the indefinable universal I or self, then we know that we are God. There is nothing else. Then we are in the state of nirvana and immortal. We cannot possibly, with our ordinary minds, conceive of immortality in any real terms. It would have to be an existence of unbroken consciousness, not necessarily in terms of any consciousness we now understand, but one running without any breaks through eternity. We are therefore all here on a purposeful evolutionary journey. We are learning first to become properly human instead of largely animal. We are learning to become eventually supermen in every sense, and finally, to become gods. Our higher selves are capable of tremendous extension by purification and refinement, and one of the purposes of our living on this earth is to purify the physical and psychic parts of ourselves, to make them proper vehicles to receive and express the unimaginable wonders and powers of the ultimate spirit, to fit us to travel with gods.
The vistas of our post-human journey are so great as to be beyond our imaginations. In the Master's words, "He who holds the keys to the secrets of death possesses the keys of life." Now, with the knowledge that death is not an end, but a recurring link in the long chain of our lives, we can review and change our attitudes to the material world and how we express ourselves in our relationships with each other and with nature herself. Our ultimate survival depends on cooperating not only with individuals, but with the whole of humanity, on having regard to the whole of creation, not just our little piece of it, our tiny corner of reality. But full understanding of life on this planet has still not been achieved. Because of superstition and the fear imposed on us by our religions and institutions, we have ignored the ageless wisdom that has long been available to us. Mankind today is preoccupied almost exclusively with materialism and self-interest, and that has led to repression and a distortion of knowledge, which might have been everyone's. Man has sacrificed truth time and again for material gain and political power. Now, approaching the millennium, the opportunity has again been offered to us to rediscover that wisdom by the restating of eternal truths. Hopefully, this heralds a new age, when we no longer have to blindly accept what was believed by generations past. Now we have the chance of a new beginning in which we can further explore the frontiers of human consciousness. Now we can openly acknowledge what many of us instinctively feel, even know, that we are all vital parts of a glorious evolutionary plan, which is our future, the future of the whole human race.